Alright, what is up, you guys? I am here with part 1 of my WrestleMania ranking. And, like I said, there's going to be 3 parts. Part 1, we will be looking at the bad WrestleManias. Part 2, we'll be looking at the average to good WrestleManias. And then 3, we'll be looking at the great WrestleManias. Now, this is a list that I have put together. Took me a pretty long time, actually. And putting my personal feelings aside, you know, what may be my favorite WrestleMania might not be the greatest. So, solely looking at quality here in, a bunch of different aspects. You know, it's not just about the in-ring competition. You have to consider storylines, character development. You have to consider booking, presentation, all that stuff. So, dead last, number 35, we have WrestleMania 9. Yeah, this one's just... This feels like a really bad in-your-house pay-per-view from 1995. That's what this really feels like. I give it to him presentation-wise. You had the kind of out of nowhere, just this construction. They built this whole mini arena at Caesar's Palace. And it's very gimmicked up, and I give him credit for that. It's the first outdoor WrestleMania, and it worked really well. But that's about the only thing that worked here. Shawn Michaels and Tatanka was a decent opening match. We had Hulk Hogan kind of taking the sideline here for now in a tag team match against Money Inc. And we had The Undertaker versus the Great Gonzalez in the worst WrestleMania streak match by far. It ended in disqualification. This match was a complete 0-star disaster. This was fucking awful. Pretty much in every way. I mean, the Crow entrance was cool, but that's about it. And then your main event, Bret Hart versus Yokozuna, with Mr. Fuji and Jim Cornette. We had the Mr. Fuji salt in the eye to Bret Hart, and then Yokozuna gets the win here. And then they salt the audience in the eye and have Hulk Hogan come out and pin Yokozuna for no reason and win the WWE Championship back. And the original plan was for him to drop the title to Bret Hart at SummerSlam, which never happened. So thank you, Hulk Hogan. Next up, we have WrestleMania 2. This was a technical disaster. WrestleMania 1, you have to find a way to top that. It was something that had never been done before. It was something that was game-changing. So how do you top that? You have a simulcast between 3 different arenas. Each arena gets 1 hour of action, and then they watch the other 2 hours on a giant screen. Sounds good on paper? No, this was just bad. We had, the boxing match, Mr. T and Roddy Piper. We had the WWE and NFL Battle Royal, which is pretty much what this pay-per-view is known for. And you actually had a decent main event with King Kong Bundy and Hulk Hogan. It's kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. I really do like that main event. But if you hold it up against the other WrestleMania main events, it honestly kind of just sounds like a house show main event. But they made it work for the most part, except for the disastrous celebrity commentary. But hey, like I said, this is just a disaster. If you are able to find the original closed circuit footage, that's the only way you can actually watch the original broadcast. It's not on the network, it's not on DVD, it's not on VHS. The original broadcast was a disaster, technically. There were audio problems, there were camera problems, so many issues that you would assume 3 simulcasts would have. And all that's been edited out, but yeah, the original airing was just, it's unfortunate. Next up, we have WrestleMania 11 from 1995. This pay-per-view is mostly well known for Lawrence Taylor versus Bam Bam Bigelow. Here's the thing. There's nothing I hate more in wrestling than celebrity involvement. That's my biggest pet peeve. But this is an example of a time celebrity involvement actually worked. And that's really the only thing that worked about this pay-per-view. Diesel and Shawn Michaels had a decent WWE Championship match. We had Bret Hart and Bob Backlund in the I Quit match. I guess it's an I Quit match because it ended with Bob Backlund just screaming into the microphone. Like, if I don't even know. It wasn't I Quit, I can tell you that much. But yeah, this was just another one of those in your house feeling pay-per-views. It's probably Diesel's best WWE title match. That's not saying much, but it's there. And like I said, the main event should never have a celebrity being involved. That's your biggest match of the year. Main event of WrestleMania. And you have Lawrence Taylor. He held his own there, but that's sad when you have to have celebrity involvement for your main event. Next up, we have WrestleMania 29. This WrestleMania can go fuck itself in every way. But we did have CM Punk versus The Undertaker. MetLife Stadium, this one, I almost went to this. I'm serious. And I am so glad that I didn't waste the $200-some to go there. You had Ryback versus Mark Henry. Let's let that sink in. Alberto Del Rio versus Jack Swagger. Two great workers, but this didn't feel like a world heavyweight title match at WrestleMania. You had Triple H versus Brock Lesnar, a very disappointing no-holds-barred match. Undertaker versus CM Punk. Probably The Undertaker's last great match, other than him and Brock Lesnar, in 2015. But, this was, to me, Undertaker's last great match. Like I said, other than the Hell in a Cell match with Brock. And, one of CM Punk's last great matches, too. Also, his other one being Brock Lesnar in 2013. So, yeah, this is just... Oh, yeah, Chris Jericho versus Fandango. Don't forget that one. And then we have Once in a Lifetime. Remember, it only happened once in our lifetime, so you can't forget that. Next up, we have WrestleMania 27. This, honestly, this was a shame because I think it did what it could, the best it could. You have Rey Mysterio and Cody Rhodes, good match. CM Punk and Randy Orton was decent. And then you have Jerry the King Lawler versus Michael Cole. Honestly, I'm going to say this now. That was one of the worst things I've ever fucking seen in my life. It was that bad. Not even Stone Cold wanted to be there. We have Snooki getting involved, so that was fun. And then we have Undertaker versus Triple H, which was a pretty good match. The first of the little dual WrestleMania rivalry there. Second in a trilogy, if you want to count WrestleMania 17. And then your main event, we saw The Miz versus John Cena. And I think the biggest problem with this WrestleMania is it felt like it was only building to the next WrestleMania. And that's, in a lot of ways, that's not what WrestleMania should be. You shouldn't be building to the next thing only. You should be concluding storylines while building to the future, but this really didn't conclude jack shit. I'm glad The Miz walked out the main event of WrestleMania champion, but honestly, it was just building towards The Rock and John Cena, and that was very apparent going into this WrestleMania. Next up, we have WrestleMania 15, the Raging Climax. So, to me, this is really a one-match show. The Rock versus Stone Cold for the WWF Championship, and it is a great main event, but it's WrestleMania. You shouldn't be having one great match. you have some decent matches. You know, the Four Corners elimination match for the Intercontinental title's good. Big Show versus Mankind, that whole little storyline was cool. The Triple Threat Hardcore title match, you know. And then we have Undertaker versus Big Boss Man in the Hell in a Cell match. And honestly, this used to be the worst Hell in a Cell match of all time. And then 2019 rolled around. So, yeah. Like I said, this was just unfortunate because you look at all the talent on here, and this is 1999. Like, this should have been one of the greatest WrestleManias of all time. You know, the Attitude Era, it was really kind of close to hitting its peak here. What I consider the peak of the Attitude Era, WrestleMania 17. You know, this was really building up to that peak. And, you know, it just was kind of a failure, unfortunately. And then next up, we have my least favorite WrestleMania of all time. It's not the worst, but it's my least favorite of all time. WrestleMania 32. I still feel about it, you know, the same as I did back when it aired. But, you know, it's not the worst WrestleMania. It may be the one I hate the most, the one I will never go back and watch again. But it does have some redeeming qualities, henceforth why it's not dead last. You have Chris Jericho and AJ Styles in a decent match. We have, you know, the triple threat match for the new women's title with Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and Charlotte. Brock Lesnar and Dean Ambrose was an utter disappointment. The Undertaker, Shane McMahon, Hell in a Cell match was an utter disappointment. This pay-per-view was a booking mess in a lot of ways. You know, the card itself doesn't look all that bad. So going in, I'm like, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Well, there you go. You know, you had the Rock appearance, which was probably the most entertaining segment on the show, honestly. And then we had your main event, Roman Reigns versus Triple H. Nobody wanted Roman to win in that stadium, and it's sad that you have to close out your biggest show of the year in a crowd of boos. You know, it's unfortunate that that's how it ended up being. You know, I myself, I'm not a Roman Reigns fan. I never have been. But still, it's just this pay-per-view left a bad taste in your mouth after it ended. And like I said, the Hell in a Cell match, that was something I was greatly looking forward to, and it just ended up being really disappointing. But honestly, my favorite match on the show was the opener, and that was the ladder match. You know, even Chris Jericho and AJ Styles felt a little underwhelming. So, next up, we have the original WrestleMania. And this one's difficult because it's the most important WrestleMania of all time. And I mean that because it's the first. It changed history. It laid the groundwork to, you know, for what Vince McMahon would make the WWF. So, this was the biggest risk in wrestling history, and it ended up being one of the biggest wins. But that doesn't make it a great show. We had Andre the Giant and Big John Studd in a pretty entertaining little match. The Body Slam Match Challenge. You know, you had the World Tag Team Championship, which was decent. You had Fabulous Moolah versus Wendy Richter with Cyndi Lauper. And then, you know, your main event, we saw Hulk Hogan and Mr. T versus Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. In a decent main event, but at the same time, it's not world-changing. The world title wasn't even on the line. In a lot of ways, it feels like it could have been just another live event, but it's more behind the scenes on why it was so historic. So, it's not the worst WrestleMania of all time. It's really not. It's just, it is the first, so you have to figure a lot of things out. And, back then, it was world-changing. So next up, we have WrestleMania V. Another one that feels like a one-match show. I love the Macho Man Hulk Hogan storyline. Fucking love it. I'm a huge Macho Man fan. I really wish he would have went over here. But, it is what it is. After WrestleMania 4, he became, WWF champion. So he had that huge push. And then next year here, we have him against Hulk Hogan. And this was epic. It's the Mega Powers exploding. This was just an epic feeling main event. Other matches we had Ultimate Warrior versus Rick Rude. They had a great rivalry. Very underrated rivalry, actually. Jake Roberts versus Andre the Giant. We had the Hart Foundation versus Honky Tonk Man and Greg the Hammer Valentine. Do you say Valentine or Valentine? I've heard both. I've always just heard it as Valentine, but I've heard people say Valentine. So, whatever. You would think Valentine, but for some reason, Valentine has become a thing. I don't know. But, like I said, very much a one-match show in a lot of ways. But, even the main event, it pretty much goes how you would think a Hulk Hogan match is going to go at WrestleMania. And it's kind of just a very average show. But, back then, it was more about the importance of the main event than the actual quality. And this was a huge draw. So for them, it was a win. Next up, we turn back a year to 1988 with WrestleMania 4. I always had a soft spot for this WrestleMania, but personal feelings aside, did it really work all that well? Not really. I think you had 16 matches here, and you're going to have that with a tournament for the vacant WWF title. And it wasn't just a tournament, though. We did have the Intercontinental Championship match with Honky Tonk Man and Beefcake. You had Strike Force versus Demolition. I've always been a huge Demolition fan myself. But, it's more remembered for the crowning achievement of Macho Man finally becoming WWF champion. And the main drawing power, honestly, of this pay-per-view was Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant again. This is a year after WrestleMania 3, and they were having their rematch here, as you can see on the back there. And, that ended up kind of being a bust in a lot of ways, but we got that. And that, to me, is what WrestleMania 4, that's its legacy. But, you have a lot of short tournament matches. I don't think this WrestleMania is quite as bad as a lot of people like to think it is. But, it's more just the memory of it. The main event, it's decent with Ted DiBiase and Macho Man. But, like I said, it's more for the result. And then finally, the final, for this portion, we have WrestleMania 13. This is a very difficult one. If you ask me what the greatest WrestleMania match of all time is, I will always say Stone Cold versus Bret Hart. To me, this is the greatest WWF and WWE match of all time. If you don't agree, that's fine, but it's hard to argue it. Like, this, to me, this is what you compare other matches to, for WWE-wise. And then, unfortunately, that's really all this pay-per-view is remembered for. The Chicago Street Fight is actually decent. A lot of people don't remember that one. And, The Undertaker won the world title in the main event, which honestly didn't happen much during his streak. So, I think he only won the title twice during his streak. No, 3 times. Yeah, 3. But you also had not Bret Hart, my God. You also had The Rock's first WrestleMania appearance versus the Sultan. Which, it's back then wasn't that big of a deal, but looking back, that's huge. You know, it's The Rock's first WrestleMania match. And, you know, like I said, the Chicago Street Fight's decent. And unfortunately, just the main event, Psycho Sid versus The Undertaker, it's not a huge draw of a main event there. And it just was kind of lacking. And it's just more remembered for The Undertaker winning the WWF title. But let's talk about Bret Hart versus Stone Cold. Like I said, to me, this is the greatest match in the history of WWE. And they pulled off something that's nearly impossible. And that's a successful double turn. And just the story of this match, the choreography, everything. This match is perfect. You know, to me, this is as good as it gets. Even in terms of WrestleMania. But that couldn't save this show from, you know, really lacking in a lot of ways. So, that's going to conclude the part 1 of this ranking. So, be sure to give me your ranking down below. And then part 2 will be coming very soon, where I go over the average to good WrestleManias. So, for now, I hope you guys enjoyed. This has been the DVD Freak. Peace out.